The Civil Services. Chapter 4, Part 2. The civil service was brought into existence by Lord Cornwallis. As we have seen in an earlier chapter, the East India Company had from the beginning carried on its trade in the East through servants who were paid low wages but who were permitted to trade privately. Later, when the company became territorial power, the same servants assumed administrative functions. They now became extremely corrupt by oppressing local weavers and artisans, merchants, zamindars, and by extorting bribes and gifts from the Rajas and Nawabs. By indulging in illegal private trade, they amassed untold wealth, with which they retired to England. Clive and Warren Hastings made attempts to put an end to their corruption, but were only partially successful. Cornwallis, who had come to India as a Governor General in 1786, was determined to purify the administration, but he realized that the company servants would not give honest or efficient service as long as they were not given adequate salaries. He therefore enforced the rules against the private trade and acceptance of presents and bribes by officials with strictness. At the same time, he raised the salaries of company servants. For example, the collector of the district was to be paid Rs 1500 a month and 1% commission on his revenue collection of district. In fact, the company civil service became the highest paid service in the world. Cornwallis also laid down that promotion in the civil service would be seniority so that the members would remain independent of outside influence. In 1800, Lord Wellesley established the College of Fort William at Calcutta for the education of the young recruits to the civil service. The directors of the company disapproved of his action and in 1806 replaced it by their own East India College at Haileybury in England. In 1853, all appointments to the civil service were made by directors of the East India Company, who placated the members of the Board of Control by letting them make some of the nominations. The directors fought hard to retain this lucrative and prized privilege and refused to surrender it even when their economic and political privileges were taken away by the Parliament. They lost it finally in 1853 when the Charter Act decreed that all recruits to the civil service were to be selected through a competitive examination. A special feature of the Indian civil service since the days of Cornwallis was that rigid and complete exclusion of Indians from it. It was laid down in 1793 that all higher posts in administration worth more than €500 a year in salary were to be held by Englishmen. This policy was also applied to other branches of the government such as the army, police, judiciary, engineering. In the words of John Shore, who succeeded Cornwallis, the fundamental principle of the England has to make the whole Indian nation subservient in any possible way to interest and benefit of ourselves. The Indians have been excluded from every honor, dignity or office which the lowest Englishman could be prevailed to accept. Why did the British follow such a policy? Many factors combined to produce it. For one, they were convinced that the administration based on British ideas, institutions and practice could be firmly established by the English personnel. And then they did not trust the ability and integrity of Indians. For example, Charles Grant, chairman of Court of Directors, condemned the people of India as a race of men lamentably degenerate and base, retaining but a feeble sense of moral obligation and sunk in misery by their vices. Similarly, Cornwallis believed that every native of Hindustan is corrupt. It may be noted that his criticism not only applied to an extent to a small class of Indian officials and zamindars of that time, but then it was equally, if not more, true of British officials in India. In fact, Cornwallis had proposed to give him high salaries in order to help them resist temptations and to become honest and obedient. But he never thought of applying the same remedy of adequate salaries to eradicate corruption among the Indian officials. In reality, exclusion of Indians from higher grades of services was a deliberate policy. These services were required at the time to establish and consolidate the British rule in India. Obviously, the task could not be left to Indians who did not possess the same instinctive sympathy and understanding of the British interests as Englishmen. Moreover, influential classes of the British society were keen to preserve the monopoly of lucrative appointments in the Indian civil service for their sons. In fact, they fought tooth and nail among themselves over these appointments. The right to make them was a perpetual bone of contention between the directors of the company and the members of the English cabinet. How could the English then agree to let Indians occupy these posts? Indians were, however, recruited in large numbers to fill the subordinate posts as they were cheaper and more readily available than Englishmen. The Indian civil service gradually developed into one of the most efficient and powerful civil services in the world. Its members exercised vast power and often participated in making of policy. They developed certain traditions of independence, integrity, and hard work, though these qualities obviously served British and not the Indian interests. They came to believe that they had an element, almost divine right to rule India. The Indian Civil Service has always been called the steel frame which reared and sustained the British rule in India. Of course, the time it became a chief opponent of all that was progressive and advanced in Indian life, and one of the main targets of attacks by the rising Indian national movement. The Army. The second important pillar of the British regime in India was the army. It fulfilled four important functions. It was the instrument through which the Indian powers were conquered. It defended the British Empire in India from foreign rivals. It safeguarded the British supremacy from the ever-present threat of internal revolt, and was chief instrument for extending and defending the British Empire in Asia and Africa. The bulk of company's army consisted of Indian soldiers, recruited chiefly from the areas presently from UP and Bihar. For instance, in 1857, the strength of the army in India was 3,11,400, whom 2,65,900 were Indians. Its officers were, however, exclusively British. At least since the days of the Cornwallis, in 1856, only 3 Indians in the army received a salary of Rs 300 per month, and the highest Indian officer was a Subedar. A large number of Indian troops had to be employed as the British troops were too far expensive. Moreover, the population of Britain were perhaps too small to provide a large soldiery needed for conquest of India. As a counterweight, the army was officered entirely by British officials, and certain number of British troops were maintained to keep the Indian soldiers under control. Even so, it appears surprising today that the handful of foreigners could conquer and control with India with predominantly Indian army. This was possible because of two factors. On the one hand, there was absence of modern nationalism in the country at the time. A soldier from Bihar or Awadh did not think and could not have thought that he is helping company to defeat Marathas or the Punjabis. He was being anti-Indian. On the other hand, the Indian soldier had a long tradition of loyalty to the salt. In other words, the Indian soldier was a good mercenary, and the company on its part was a good paymaster. It paid its soldiers regularly and well, something that the Indian rulers and chieftains were no longer doing. The police. The third pillar of the British rule was the police, whose creator was once again Cornwallis. He relieved the zamindars of their police functions and established a regular police force to maintain law and order. In this respect, he went back to and modernized the old Indian system of thanas. This put India ahead of Britain, where the system of police had not developed yet. Cornwallis established a system of circles or thanas headed by a daroga, who was the Indian. Later, the post of the district superintendent of police was created to head the police organization in a district. Once again, Indians were excluded from all the superior posts. In the villages, the duties of the police continued to be performed by village watchmen, who were maintained by the villagers. The police gradually succeeded on reducing major crimes such as dacoity. The police also prevented the organization of large-scale conspiracy against the foreign control, and when the national movement arose, the police was used to suppress it. In its dealings with the people, Indian police adopted an unsympathetic attitude. The Committee of Parliament reported in 1813 that the police committed depredations on the peaceable inhabitants of the same nature as the practice by dacoits whom they were employed to suppress. And William Bentinck, the Governor General, wrote in 1832, "As for the police, so far from being protection to the people, I cannot better illustrate that the public feeling regarding it than by following fact that nothing can exceed the popularity of a recent regulation by which, if a robbery has been committed, the police are prevented from making any inquiry into it except upon the requisition of the persons robbed. That is to say, the shepherd is more ravenous beast of the prey than the wolf." The judicial organization. The British laid foundation for a new system of dispensing justice through a hierarchy of civil and criminal courts. Though given a start by Warren Hastings, the system was stabilized by Cornwallis. In 1793, each district was established by Diwani Adalat or civil court, presided over by the district judge who belonged to the civil service. Cornwallis thus separated the posts of the civil judge and the collector. Appeal from the district court lay first to 4 provincial courts of civil appeal and then finally to the Sadar Diwani Adalat. Below the district court were registrars courts headed by the Europeans and a number of subordinate courts headed by the Indian judges known as the Munsifs and Amins. To deal with criminal cases, Cornwallis divided the Presidency of Bengal into 4 divisions, each of which the Court of Circuit presided over by the civil servants was established. Below these courts came a large number of Indian magistrates to try petty cases. Appeals from the courts of circuit lay with Sadar Nizamat Adalat. The criminal court applied Muslim criminal law in modified and less harsh form so that the tearing apart of limbs and such other punishments were prohibited. The civil courts applied the customary law that had prevailed in the area or among the section of the people since time immemorial. In 1831, William Bednick abolished the provincial courts of appeal and circuit. Their work was assigned first to the commissions and later to the district judges and district collectors. Bednick also raised the status and the powers of Indians in the judicial service and appointed them as deputy magistrates, subordinate judges, and principal Sadar Amins. In 1865, high courts were established at Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay to replace the Sadar courts of Diwani and Nizamat. The British also established a new system of laws through the processes of enactment and codification of old laws. The traditional system of justice in India had been largely based on customary law, which arose from long tradition and practice. Though many laws were based on the Shastras and Shariat, as well as on the imperial authority, though they continued to observe customary law in general, the British gradually evolved a new system of laws. They introduced the regulations codified the existing laws and often systemized and modernized them through judicial interpretation. The Charter Act of 1833 conferred all lawmaking power on the Governor General in Council. All this meant that the Indians were now to live increasingly under the man-made laws, which might be good or bad, but which had to be obeyed blindly and which could not be questioned as they were supposed to be divine and therefore sacred. In 1833, the government appointed the Law Commission headed by Lord Macaulay to codify Indian laws. Its labors eventually resulted in the Indian Penal Code, the Western derived codes of civil and criminal procedure, and other code of laws. The same laws now prevailed all over the country as they were enforced by the uniform system of courts. Thus, it may be said that India was judicially unified.